Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be answering one very simple question. Are Blood Elf Paladins better than Alliance Paladins? We're mainly going to be looking at the differences in the overall DPS of a Retribution spec. Just before we jump in guys, please do consider subscribing to the channel because that really helps out. But anyway, let's get on with it. So first of all, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the racial differences between Blood Elf and Alliance, since both have a unique seal. Then I'm going to precisely evaluate the DPS difference between both Paladins. First of all, I'll use a character in kind of mid-range tier 4 raiding gear, and then we'll test on a character decked out in tier 6 gear. And lastly, I'll make my conclusions. So why do people generally think that Blood Elves are better? Well, the main reason is Seal of Blood, which is a seal that deals 35% of your weapon damage as holy damage on every single melee swing, while also draining your health by 10% of the damage dealt, and also unleashing the seal deals 295 to 325 holy damage and drains health equal to 35% of the damage dealt. So why is this seal so good? First of all, it deals damage based on weapon damage, which means the better weapon you get, the more damage it deals, so it scales very well. Also, the damage is guaranteed to happen, so it provides very consistent damage. Plus, at a first glance you may think that the health drained on the player is a negative, but it's actually more of a positive, since when a Holy Paladin debuffs a raid buff with Seal of Light, it will entirely top off your health, while simultaneously giving you mana through the Spiritual Attunement passive ability. And it's also fairly cheap on mana. So overall it provides great damage that scales very well as you get better and better gear, and has a little bit of cheeky mana regeneration on top of it. Let's take a look at the seal unique to Alliance, Seal of Vengeance. So Seal of Vengeance is a stacking dot debuff that scales with spell power, which means it actually kind of sucks for Retribution spec. Provides slightly better DPS and threat per second for a Protection Paladin, but that's about it. Alliance Rep Paladin have no other choice but to use Seal of Command. So Seal of Command has a chance to deal damage equal to 70% of your weapon damage as holy damage, and unleashing the seal does 228 to 252 damage. So the first issue with this is obviously the seal is RNG based. Second issue is that it simply does less damage than Seal of Blood overall. Third issue is that it deals extra damage to stunned enemies, but you can't stun raid bosses. But, and I mean a big but here that is massively overlooked, Seal of Command is way more mana efficient than Seal of Blood, and it can also be downgraded, unlike Seal of Blood, to deal about 11% less DPS, but consume 55% less mana, which means the longer mana demanding fights, Seal of Command can actually be much better than Seal of Blood. The second big issue we have to deal with is seal twisting. We don't know whether seal twisting will be viable if Classic TBC is released, because it's technically a glitch that takes advantage of latency to boost DPS. Basically, you maintain Seal of Command up constantly, but a split second before you deal a melee swing, you switch to Seal of Blood. Long story short, you can benefit from both seal effects with perfect timing. The seal twisting does exist in the Classic TBC if it is released. The gap between Blood Elf and Alliance Paladin DPS will probably be even greater, since Alliance Paladins will seal twist with Seal of Righteousness, which only deals 137 holy damage on a melee swing, compared to the 300 damage Seal of Blood does, which is currently doing it on my character anyway. And that will also increase further as I get better gear, and Seal of Righteousness won't scale as well as Seal of Blood because it scales better with spell power. Just like Seal of Vengeance, it's tailored more for a Protection Paladin. On top of these specific Paladin racial differences, the normal racial differences actually favour the Blood Elf, since they can use Mana Tap for mana regeneration and range pulls, and Arcane Torrent for an interrupt and short silence effect. Although the human racial is actually also pretty good due to the expertise bonus, and which does actually provide a fairly little bit of DPS. Nonetheless, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But anyway, let's truly find out how much of a DPS difference there is between a Blood Elf Paladin and a Alliance Paladin. So, there's a few things to bear in mind about these tests. First of all, the DPS will obviously be way more in a raid, and it's important to note that Wind Fury Totem massively buffs Seal of Blood, allegedly more than Seal of Command, if we know 100% that Seal of Command is based on an internal PPM system, which means that no matter how many melee swings you use and extra melee swings you get, Seal of Command is only going to proc a certain amount of times per minute. Okay. I've also used a fairly typical rotation, so I'm using Judgment on cooldown, Crusader Strike on cooldown. I'm using Avenging Wrath at 3 Vengeance stacks, Consecration with Avenging Wrath, and I'm snapshotting Consecration when Avenging Wrath is about to fall off. I've done these tests until I run out of mana. I think that's a fairly fair way to do it, because we're also going to evaluate the mana efficiency of each seal too, because that does actually provide an interesting conclusion. So roughly the first test in tier 4 gear lasts about 1 minute, and then in tier 6 gear it will last 1 minute and 40 seconds. And these are also private server numbers across 2 private servers, so the numbers aren't going to be absolutely 100% precise, if that is even a word, to what classic TBC numbers will actually be. And nonetheless, I think the results are actually quite interesting and probably not what you would expect. I think a lot of people think Blood Elf Paladin are astronomically better than Alliance Paladins, but it's not really the case. So here are the test results. The top number is the total damage done in the test. Then we have the range of DPS. Below that we have the total damage of Seal of Command and obviously Seal of Blood. And then underneath that, that is the basically combined damage of what the seal is actually providing in terms of DPS. So that's the total damage of Seal of Command. That's the total damage of Seal of Blood. So as you can see, the total damage for Seal of Command was 30,832, about DPS range of 500 to 800 DPS when you look at the graph, and then the total damage it provided was 1,932. When we move over to Seal of Blood, the total damage was 3,106, sorry, 31,206, so not that much of a difference. Similar DPS, 500 to 800 DPS, and the total damage that it provided was 10,582. So as you can see, what's interesting here is that Seal of Command was actually providing more damage than Seal of Blood, and I think the main reason for that is because I was able to use more Seal of Commands before I ran out of mana. So as you can see, like in the early tiers when you're doing tier 4 content, there doesn't really seem to be that much of an incredible difference. Because if I did that test again, I could probably get Seal of Command on top of Seal of Blood, and I can get Seal of Blood below Seal of Command if I kept testing and testing. And this is basically just an average. So overall, when you're not very geared, there doesn't seem to be that much of a difference. And furthermore, I've actually took this testing into a raiding environment with crappy gear on. I actually think Seal of Command would come out on top of DPS when we're talking about overall DPS in a raid fight, because obviously raid fights, if you're not very well geared, you are going to basically run out of mana. Mana consumption is going to be an issue, and you can down rank Seal of Command, whereas you can't do it with Seal of Blood, which overall will probably end up providing more DPS to you, because you're able to actually keep your seal actually buffed on your player to continue to do DPS for longer. And I actually think that Seal of Command probably provide more DPS in longer fights. And obviously it's important to bear in mind that Blood Elf Paladins will probably be able to use Seal of Blood, and when they're starting to run out of mana, start using Seal of Command. Overall, I just don't think there's that much of a difference when you're under geared. So let's take a little look at the tier 6 results. It's important to bear in mind that this was technically done in decked out PvP gear with best in slot enchants and gemming and all that kind of thing. So I went on to the Smolder Forge server. Anyway, so total damage done was 103,282. The DPS range was from 800 to 1,450. The reason why that seems so ski with is because since Seal of Command is so RNG dependent and very proc related, it's very kind of inconsistent. So that's why it looks so different to the Seal of Blood DPS. Because at first glance it looks better, but it's actually technically not. Anyway, and the total damage that Seal of Command provided was 24,899, but as you can see, this number here, 6,780, that is the element of the seal where you are unleashing this seal to do holy damage, and then the other element is obviously based on weapon damage. So as you can see, because it's not based on weapon damage, it has scaled very poorly, whereas the weapon damage element has scaled fairly well. Next we have Seal of Blood. So overall it did 99,166 damage. So interestingly, that is less damage. The average DPS range was 1,100 to 1,350, and then the total damage that Seal of Blood provided was 39,663. Furthermore, if you compare Seal of Blood to Seal of Command together, Seal of Blood did 14,764 more damage, which is an increase of 59%. And when you compare the total DPS difference, it is actually 22% increase. So theoretically, Seal of Blood should provide 22% more DPS, but not more total damage. Okay? So obviously we have these two numbers here, 103,000, 99,000. Why did Seal of Command do more damage? And the simple fact is, it took longer for me to burn my mana out. And I was actually able to use more Seal of Commands because it costs less mana. So overall in the fight, even though these fights are roughly the same duration, Seal of Command actually ended up doing more damage. And that is the strange and very interesting thing about these tests. What we've essentially concluded is Seal of Blood does more DPS, but Seal of Command is way more mana efficient. So theoretically, if mana wasn't an issue at all, and you obviously brought mana potions and everything you can to regenerate your mana, and yeah, just theoretically if mana was not an issue, which it's going to obviously become less of an issue where you get better gear, then Seal of Blood does provide more DPS, but Seal of Command does provide more total damage because it basically consumes less mana. So it basically means that Alliance Paladins are going to have much more damage stamina, but Horde Paladins are going to have overall more DPS. So when Horde Paladins get better and better gear, we have a higher mana pool. It probably means that overall in tier 6, tier 5 gear, they're going to do more damage. But Alliance Paladins will always have more stamina. We've also got to bear in mind that a human expertise ratio will boost their DPS slightly, provides 1% less chance to be dodged or parried. Bosses can still dodge when you attack them from behind. They have a 6.5% chance to dodge you, but obviously with a human racial that is 5.5%. Not to mention that you'll have Enhancement Shaman in your group with the Heroic Presence buff that provides an extra 1% hit that Blood Elf Paladin don't actually get. It means you can equip a armor penetration piece or a crit piece over a hit piece, so that is something to bear in mind because that will provide a pretty decent DPS boost. And obviously as a human you have a reputation boost by 10%, and you're going to be doing a lot of rep farming in the Burning Crusade. Overall I think that this just narrows the gap even more. Overall I don't think the difference is incredibly serious. Alliance Paladins will probably even do more overall damage on progression fights where the fights are long and people don't really have that much gear yet. When everyone is geared up and farming the raids and everything, then Blood Elf Paladins will take over and they're going to provide slightly more DPS for speedrunning, but I think it's only ever going to be 100 to 200 DPS increase. But you also have to bear in mind that overall Alliance Paladins probably end up doing not more damage in the fight, but they will. It's hard to calculate because you're calculating DPS and overall damage at the same time, so it does become very complicated. But the point is that if we were to compare the total damage that Alliance Paladin does in a long fight compared to a Blood Elf Paladin, the DPS, the actual damage difference, I don't think it's going to be that much. I definitely don't think it's significant enough to convince people to totally re-roll to Horde when Classic TBC comes out. Another last point, they're probably thinking, well, what about Mana Tap and Arcane Torrent? Don't they make up for the less mana efficiency that Blood Elves have? Unfortunately, the mana that it actually provides is really, really terrible. As you can see here, it's only 294 mana every 2 minutes, so that's obviously not that great. But anyway guys, I've talked about everything that I absolutely have to talk about. My name is Medigoblin. Until my next video, ciao.